During the mid-90s, with the evolution of 32-bit consoles seeing massive popularity in mainstream media, but it was also a time when many unique and popular genres also started to decline. That while games were being released on these systems, they didn't release to great appeal, as they were often considered an outdated gameplay idea. And as with each generation, people would always have their opinions on what was good or what was popular and what was in between. And I think for many of us growing up with iconic fighters, when you look at the likes of Streets of Rage and Final Fight on the likes of Sega and Nintendo systems, they pretty much set the benchmark for everything that was to come after it, and they really did, because they were an absolute fantastic series of games. So when we move forward into the next generation during the 90s with the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, at some point there was going to be games that were going to come out that tried to capitalise on this declining trend. While there was some beat-em-ups that were added to the PlayStation's lineup in Japan mainly in the early days of the console's lifespan, they fared pretty well with decent reviews and appealed to a certain degree for players. But as time went on, literally after about a year or two of the PlayStation being out on the market, those games were proven to be less popular. People aiming for more mainstream approaches, or what was trending at the time, with the likes of arcade fighters, racing games, RPG games starting to become extremely popular. So the likes of these other or older style genres with beat 'em ups were starting to decline, and licensed games more particular, it was a struggle to really make a good game based off of an iconic franchise. Like in 1996 you had Batman Forever, the arcade game, which is a decent game in its own right, and it does appeal to many because there are a lot of fans of this game that played it in the arcade and would have had copies of the game growing up on the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. And there are a number of other games that were released on the system. You had the likes of Fighting Force, that would be one of the first 3D beat 'em ups, and honestly it's definitely one of the best on the PlayStation in that respect. You also had the likes of Crisis Beat, which is another very even rare game, but that is also a really good beat 'em up as well in its own right, and it doesn't get as much, nowhere near the amount of attention that it deserves. But then we have the Fantastic Four, which was released in 1997 on the PlayStation and later in Japan in 1998, that tries to capitalise on popular characters from the Marvel universe. And while the idea was good, it just, at the time, it came out really at a time when this series or this genre, like I said, was on the decline. And because the fact is it tried to change certain dynamics, it had 3D graphics, but all the characters and sprites, enemies were all 2D. And I think it just, as a result of the timing and the gameplay mechanics and certain features, it just left a sour taste with gamers that weren't really interested in this type of game really anymore at that stage. But that it also didn't fully capitalise on a licensed IP with regards to the gameplay, and it was reflected in the reviews, saying that it was very boring and repetitive. It'd be fun for a few minutes, but then you'd quickly find that it just was the same thing over and over again with the levels, and you'll find that throughout the course of the story mode. Now, while pretty much every magazine on the planet slated it, often considering it, and it's, even to this day, it's still considered as one of the worst games ever to be released at that time, not just on the PlayStation but overall. But is it the worst game ever? I don't personally think so. I think it was just a reflection of timing. Yes, the gameplay compared to other beat 'em ups, if you compare it to the likes of Streets of Rage more predominantly, yeah, there is a massive difference, because if you've ever played Streets of Rage 2, that for me is the best beat 'em up ever made, hands down. It's just a masterpiece in its own right, and it's so good that I still find myself going back to play it pretty much regularly. I love the soundtrack, it has everything, it's just everything is mastered to perfection. But with this game, I can agree with some of the issues that magazines had and what people had. Yes, the gameplay is fine, it's easy to pick up and play, but it does get a bit repetitive. But it doesn't have that same atmosphere, it doesn't have that same grip on you like that what Streets of Rage would have had, where you're ready and it gets you all pumped up for the action. Streets of Rage was really good at doing that, even Final Fight as well. Because some of the main gripes was the fact with this game is that while it does have some decent features, it's just the music and the tone of the game doesn't really fit into what it's trying to do, and if anything that kind of goes against it. See, music, as we all know, is one of the defining factors on providing a great experience, and if the music doesn't complement the gameplay style, it's very hard to get into it. It really is, because you want a game to capture you on an emotional level, and if a game doesn't manage to do that, then that's where you're going to struggle. But I think where this game tries to capitalise, or where it tried to get its ideas from, see, it wasn't just based on the modern iterations of Marvel Comics. I think it tried to go back even further than that, to the earlier days, way back back in the likes of the 70s and early 80s. That's kind of the trend that this game was more or less going for. It didn't seem to really fixate on a modern aesthetic. It tried to fit into a whole different era, and I think that is what caused a lot of confusion, and that's one of the reasons why I think it didn't go down too well with players at the time. And like I said, coupled with that and the combination of just pure timing, because it did come out when literally this type of game was literally going downhill. But in saying that, we were seeing some games come out. You had Nightmare Creatures, which is a beat 'em up in its own right, but it's also a horror game, but it combines mostly different types of elements. But essentially it is a beat 'em up, but it was done in a completely different way. But it managed to capitalise on different trends, and it managed to do it really, really well. And the fact is that it was something new, unique and different. It was completely, in many ways, original. It had great music, great sound effects. Yes, the controls can be quite clunky, but that just all added to its charm, and that's why in many cases when you look at all of those features, that's the reason why it was so memorable, because it combined so many of those features. Great level design, great enemies, great animations. The atmosphere was incredible in that game, and then mixed with the fantastic soundtrack. That's the essence of a good game. Now, not every developer or every game manages to achieve that feat. Some games do fall a good bit behind, so unfortunately Fantastic Four was the game to hit that. And it's funny because this game would have come out around the same time as Nightmare Creatures. I do remember the first time I ever experienced Fantastic Four was on a demo disc with the official PlayStation magazine, and funnily enough, a demo of Nightmare Creatures was also on the same disc, and I remember playing between the two of them, and I really enjoyed both games. Now mind you, I played Nightmare Creatures a lot more. I thought that game was brilliant. That's one of my favourite games on the PlayStation. But I genuinely, for the short demo that Fantastic Four had, you played as the Human Torch, and I thought it was enjoyable because I grew up playing Streets of Rage and beat 'em ups like it, and I thought it was quite fun and it was different. But looking back, I did manage to buy a copy of Fantastic Four some years later in the mid 2000s for the PlayStation, as I was going through a phase of trying to recollect old games, and I managed to get my hands on it, and sitting down and playing the full game now, I will admit that even I did find it a little bit on the repetitive side. But it's not all doom and gloom with this game, as much as people like to put it down. There are some decent features with it. If anything, it's one of the original and first games on the PlayStation to make use of the 4-player multi-tap feature. Like, there's very few beat 'em up games on the PlayStation at all that allow you to use or make use of 4 controllers that you can play with your mates all at the same time. So that was a nice touch. Plus you had the addition of some hidden characters, like you even had the She-Hulk, among a few other unlockables that you could get in the game. And plus it had the addition of some additional treats, like with the loading screens, where you could play like mini, like over the top racing games or futuristic racers, like just racing on a track, shooting enemies and trying to collect items to try and win the races. So that was a nice touch as well. But to say that it's one of the worst games ever, I can see what people mean by it, but I don't necessarily think that it is. I think it has enough here that it does deserve some merit. Right, I will admit it's definitely not the best beat 'em up out there. It's far from it. And the fact is, it's from a licensed brand. It could have been better in many regards. But it does have some cool traits in it that definitely stand out that you didn't see at the time. And like I always say, regardless of whether a game is great, whether it's in between or it's bad, or whatever you may think, there's always something that you can take from the experience. There's always something unique to that game that you won't really get anywhere else, and Fantastic Four is no different in most regards. But it is what it is. People are just gonna like it or hate it for what it is. There is more people out there that hate it, plus I see a lot of people that do like to jump on the bandwagon. That's just the reality of the internet, unfortunately. Whereas I like to try and see a game for what it is, what it represents, and I know from my own experience, because I actually put time into playing the game, and I know the things that I like and what I don't like about it. So yes, I know there are better games out there, and I've played better games. I'm not going to deny that, but it is what it is. I don't genuinely think it's the worst game out there, and I genuinely don't think it's the worst game on the PlayStation. I have actually played some terrible games, but even at that, I don't like to be totally negative about them. I always like to kind of break games down and look at them in a way to try and find something out of them that you can like. But it's all about your opinion. It's all about the experience you gain from it. Whether you like it or you don't, that's totally up to you, and that's fine. That's the way I see it. And if you don't like a game, you just move on to the next. If you do enjoy it, you keep playing it. It's very simple. But I wouldn't totally disregard a game just because of negative reviews. Like I said, it does have some touching points that are worth looking into and that are noticeable, especially with the multiplayer elements. And that in itself can make it enjoyable. If you have a few mates to play it with, not only can you play cooperative mode, playing with each other, there is also a battle mode that you can play against each other as well. And I remember Streets of Rage 2 having something similar, and that was pretty cool. So there are enough features here that do warrant at least a bit of time put into it. But again, I'll leave that up to you. But regardless, of my thoughts or opinions. I would love to hear yours on what you think of Fantastic Four. What do you think of the game overall? Is it something you played back in the day, or maybe did you even enjoy it? Or maybe not so much. Whatever stories you do have of the game, I would love to hear them, so be sure to share them down in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be updated of future videos. And if you would like to see more content around other types of games similar to this that were also released on the PlayStation, then you can check out the playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.